I never thought a single moment could burn so deep. A sharp flash of humiliation in front of everyone I cared about. A public fracture in the facade I'd carefully maintained for years. But that night, at Lisa's wedding reception, when Stuart cut through my toast with a sneer, calling my words boring and irrelevant, something inside me cracked. The room tilted, laughter bubbling up like acid, and my heart thudded so loudly I was sure it would echo in my ears long after the room went quiet again. I forced myself to smile, a brittle shield, and muttered, "Fair enough." Then I slipped away, my throat tight, my hands trembling. I told myself it was a joke gone wrong, that Stuart was just stressed, but the sting of those words replayed in my mind, deeper than any wound I'd felt before. My name is Madison Hughes, and I'm 28 years old, a software engineer specializing in cybersecurity living in Chicago. On paper, I'm doing well. 6 years in the tech world have sharpened my skills, and I'm proud of the quiet expertise I bring to my job. But none of that ever shows at home, where I am the invisible pillar holding everything together. My family leans on me in ways they never acknowledge. Last month alone, I covered $1,200 in overdue bills for my parents, managing finances they couldn't or wouldn't face. I stayed up late nights balancing budgets and calming tempers no one else dared to touch. Lisa, my younger sister, floats through life with charm and ease, and Stuart, once my closest friend, has become a shadow lurking just out of sight, always watching, always waiting to undercut me. At family dinners, I'm the one who smooths over arguments and absorbs the tension, but I'm rarely the one who gets thanks or recognition. When Stuart smiles warmly across the table, it's a practiced smile, friendly on the surface, but layered with something sharper underneath. He'll make a sly comment, a casual dig disguised as humor, and I'll feel the sting, the familiar ache of being sidelined. That night, when he dismissed my opinion on something trivial, I swallowed the hurt and nodded, pretending it didn't matter. I told myself respect would come with time, that my quiet work behind the scenes would one day be seen. But beneath my calm exterior, anxiety hummed, a storm quietly gathering. The family home, the place where all our memories are rooted, is legally under my name. I hold that secret close, a silent power I've never dared to reveal. For now, peace is fragile, and I'm afraid to shatter it. I still remember when the cracks first appeared, like small fissures in what should have been solid ground. At 13, I sat at the kitchen table with Dad, asking for help to prepare for college entrance exams. His eyes barely flickered to me as he told me to focus on more practical things, as if my dreams were childish fantasies. Meanwhile, Stuart, the golden child of our family, was lavished with praise for the smallest achievements. A perfect report card, a trophy from a weekend game. At family gatherings, Mom's eyes would light up eagerly when Stuart spoke, but they rarely met mine with the same warmth. One summer, when Lisa and I needed new school supplies, Mom bought Lisa a brand new laptop, while I received a secondhand tablet, its screen scratched and battery fading. I told myself, it's just her way of showing tough love, but the sting lingered like a quiet, unwelcome guest. Dad's comparisons were a constant background noise. Too sensitive, he'd say, shaking his head when I expressed my feelings. Not ambitious enough, he muttered once when I hesitated to take a risky job offer. That summer, I found a letter Dad wrote, tucked away in an old drawer. Praise poured out for Stuart's future potential, while my name was nowhere to be found. The words stung like a slap, but I swallowed the pain and carried the weight silently. I learned early that my worth in their eyes was measured by a standard I couldn't reach, while Stuart danced effortlessly in the spotlight. This wasn't just family dynamics. It was a pattern of exclusion and neglect woven into every interaction. Despite everything, I've made sacrifices that no one really knows about. For the past 5 years, I've quietly paid the family mortgage, $1,500 every month, and covered utilities that averaged $400. I put off buying a home of my own, shelving dreams of stability while I kept the family homestead afloat. Twice in the last 3 years, I canceled vacations Daniel and I planned together, choosing instead to cover unexpected medical bills for Mom. Daniel worries about me. He's noticed how much I give and how little I get back. "Madison, they don't even thank you," he said last Christmas, his voice heavy with concern. "But I still believe they'll see my value someday. I keep sacrificing, holding on to hope like a fragile thread." Stuart, meanwhile, plays his part well. He flirts with family members at gatherings, charming those who will listen, while subtly undermining me in conversations that matter. Lisa watches these exchanges, mostly neutral, never fully taking my side or Stuart's. Mom openly praises Stuart, her eyes shining with pride, while Dad remains silent, a quiet spectator to the growing divide. The house, the family's heart and soul, is legally in my name, a fact I guard carefully. It's my secret weapon, one I've never had to use but keep close. A reminder that beneath all this invisibility, I hold a power they don't suspect. The stage is set, and the tension simmers just beneath the surface. That night at Lisa's wedding was the first time the gulf between us became impossible to ignore. With dozens of relatives and friends gathered around, I stood up to give a toast, my voice steady as I spoke of family, memories, and hope. But Stuart cut through my words like a knife, loud and clear. "Boring," he said, smirking. "Irrelevant." A few guests chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or be embarrassed for him. Mom sent me a tight smile, eyes avoiding mine as if to say, "Don't make a scene." My throat tightened, heat rising to my face, but I forced a smile and said, "Fair enough." Then I slipped out quietly, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I told myself Stuart was stressed, that he didn't mean it. Maybe it was a joke gone wrong or a moment of poor judgment. But the whispers behind my back, the stifled laughter, all felt like nails on fragile glass. It was the first time I truly felt how wide the distance had grown between us. For once, I chose silence over confrontation, a small act of self-protection in a room full of eyes. That seed of doubt, quietly planted that night, grew roots in the dark. Maybe this wasn't something that could be fixed with time or patience. Maybe the peaceful family I'd hoped for was just a fragile illusion, and I was standing on the edge of a storm. The day after Lisa's wedding horror, I tried to curl into myself, hoping the storm would pass. But Stuart's counterattack was swift, silent, and coldly precise. I started noticing the shift almost immediately. At a family brunch, where laughter once filled the room warmly, a chill crawled under my skin. Stuart was already weaving his poison. I overheard Cousin Mark, an easy pawn in Stuart's hand, cornering Daniel with pointed questions. "So, Daniel," Mark asked, voice low and sly, "why does Madison always have to be in charge of the money? Doesn't it feel like she's controlling everything? Too controlling, maybe?" I caught Aunt Susan's icy glance as she whispered similar doubts to Daniel later, her words dripping with disdain. "Is it really fair that Madison rules the roost without asking for input? Families should share, you know." Daniel's expression tightened, caught between loyalty to me and the swirling accusations. The room, once safe, felt like a courtroom. Stuart was playing victim masterfully, painting me as the villain wielding power I never sought to flaunt. At that same brunch, Evelyn, always quick with a cutting remark, approached me with a patronizing smile that made my stomach twist. "Madison, you're always too sensitive. Maybe if you lighten up a little, people wouldn't misunderstand you." Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes held a judgment that cut deeper than any blunt insult. Dad sat nearby, arms crossed, nodding slightly as if confirming her point. I wanted to shrink into my chair, my throat thickening with a mix of humiliation and disbelief. Was I really just overreacting? Was I the problem here? The gaslighting crept in insidiously. Stuart never confronted me directly. Instead, he let his concerned family members do his dirty work. The whispers behind my back, the sideways glances, the subtle undermining in conversations. It was like watching a mask slowly peel away, revealing a family I didn't recognize. Daniel stood firm beside me, his eyes haunted by confusion. He whispered, "I don't get it, Mads. They're twisting everything. You've done so much." But even his steadfastness couldn't shield me from the isolation tightening its grip. Each day, the family atmosphere shifted further. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of doubt and suspicion, gasping for air but met only with cold dismissal. Stuart's two-faced charm was working brilliantly. Behind closed doors, I was the outsider, the meddler, the selfish one. The very people I'd sacrificed so much for now questioned my intentions, while Stuart basked in their unearned trust. That quiet retreat I once sought became impossible. The battlefield was here, and I was surrounded. Refusing to let this spiral destroy me, I took a deep breath and decided to confront the rot head-on. I requested a family meeting, something calm, something transparent. We gathered in the living room a week later, Stuart sitting smugly beside Mom and Dad, with Uncle James as mediator. I laid out my case with as much composure as I could muster. "I've paid $90,000 toward the mortgage over 5 years," I began, voice steady but firm. "Covered unpaid bills, kept this house running. I've been the emotional backbone of this family, even when no one noticed." I watched their faces, searching for a flicker of understanding, but Stuart wiped a fake tear from his cheek, his voice dripping with mock hurt. "Madison's just trying to control everyone as usual. She can't take a simple disagreement." Mom looked away, her eyes refusing to meet mine, while Dad, arms folded, said, "Families have disagreements, Madison. Maybe you should learn to respect Stuart more." The words hit like a slap, disbelief twisting in my gut. I continued, "I'm not trying to control, just trying to keep us afloat." Uncle James chimed in, nodding toward Stuart's side. "It's all misunderstandings. No need to make it bigger than it is." My carefully measured words dissolved into the stale, heavy air. I saw the impatience in their eyes, the dismissiveness that stung worse than any insult. The meeting, meant to create bridges, became a wall. I left feeling unheard, dismissed, and somehow smaller than before. Despite my efforts to be peaceful, factual, and patient, the family was closed off to me. That day, the harsh truth settled in. I was fighting a losing battle in their eyes, not because I lacked evidence or reason, but because my worth was being rewritten by Stuart's cruel narrative. The family I thought I belonged to was slipping through my fingers, and no matter how loudly I spoke, my voice fell on deaf ears. 3 months passed, and the quiet war escalated into a public spectacle I couldn't ignore. Daniel and I had invited family to a company party, hoping to blend our worlds, the personal and professional, into one safe space. But Stuart had other plans. Midway through dinner, with a casual cruelty that froze my blood, he leaned toward my colleagues and family, his voice low but sharp. "You know, Madison's been secretly controlling the family finances for years. Manipulative, really." The room seemed to tilt as whispers erupted around me, like a wave of ice crashing against my skin. I caught the stunned looks on Lisa's face, her eyes darting away in embarrassment. Daniel's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around his glass. The damage was immediate and visceral. My professional reputation, something I'd worked so hard to build, felt like it was unraveling in real time. Stuart's words spread fast, seeping like poison. Soon, some of Daniel's clients knew too, their once friendly greetings now awkward, weighted with silent judgment. I felt exposed and raw, my trust shattered in a room full of people I'd counted on. Mom's expression was the cruelest cut of all. She smiled at Stuart, pride gleaming in her eyes, as if congratulating him on this calculated blow. The room grew silent after Stuart added, "Maybe Madison's just jealous she never got the spotlight." The words hung heavy, a deliberate barb aimed to humiliate. I could feel the heat of all those eyes on me, the electric sting of betrayal so sharp I wanted to disappear. This wasn't a careless insult. It was a strategic takedown, timed perfectly to maximize my downfall. In that moment, the fragile threads holding me together frayed dangerously. The humiliation wasn't just emotional. It threatened to undo everything I'd built, my credibility, my relationships, my sense of self. I realized Stuart's game was no longer subtle undermining. He wanted me erased, broken in front of those I cared about most. And as the room buzzed with murmurs, I sat frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down like a stone in my chest. Despite all the damage, I reached a breaking point where I knew silence would only feed the fire. With trembling hands, I extended an olive branch, inviting Stuart to meet me for coffee, hoping for even a sliver of peace. I laid out my needs clearly: respect, honesty, acknowledgement of my sacrifices. I proposed a plan to redistribute household responsibilities fairly, to share the emotional and financial load I'd carried alone for so long. I spoke calmly, hoping that some part of him might hear reason. But Stuart's smile was cold, devoid of any warmth or hope. "I'm done pretending," he said flatly. "You're just playing the victim, Madison. I'm not falling for it." The rejection stung worse than any insult, a final, deliberate shutting of the door I'd tried to open. That night, as I returned home, a folded note slipped silently under my door caught my eye. The message was clear and terrifying. "Stop meddling." The handwriting was jagged, aggressive. That line, crossed so brutally, marked the end of any illusion that this was just family drama. It was emotional sabotage, a war I hadn't asked for but was now forced to fight. I folded the note carefully, a hollow ache settling deep inside. I realized then, with a heavy heart, that I had done everything I could. My vulnerability, my offers for peace, were met with venom. The door on reconciliation slammed shut, and I was left standing alone in the cold silence of what was left. The whispers that had once been faint began to roar around me, turning into an unbearable cacophony that drowned out any sense of belonging. It wasn't just Stuart's poison anymore. It was the family's collective turning away. Lisa's distance was the first crack I felt beneath my feet. She told me she needed space, as if my presence was a weight she could no longer bear. Her words, so casual yet so cutting, echoed in my mind long after our conversation ended. "I just need some time to think, Mads," she said softly, avoiding my eyes. It wasn't just a request for space. It was a subtle eviction from the family circle. Evelyn pulled Daniel aside one afternoon, speaking in hushed tones. I caught fragments of their conversation, words like too controlling, overbearing, and unreasonable, hung heavy in the air. The sting of those accusations was like an acid burn against my skin. Even my closest cousin, someone I'd trusted implicitly, began to avoid my calls and texts, offering polite excuses that felt like slaps disguised as kindness. I was shrinking, becoming invisible within the very walls of the home I'd fought so hard to protect. The laughter that once filled our family dinners now turned into a cold, uncomfortable silence whenever I entered the room. I spent nights curled up on the couch, questioning everything I'd ever believed about myself. Maybe I was the problem after all. The doubt was a relentless tide against the fortress of my self-worth. Am I too much? Too demanding? Too sensitive? The questions looped endlessly in my mind, choking the hope I'd clung to for years. Exhaustion clouded my thoughts, and I felt like a ghost wandering through my own life, present but unseen, loved but unlovable. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath that raw pain, something smaller yet fiercer began to glow, a fragile ember of resolve that whispered, "This can't be the end." Daniel's steadfast support was the only anchor in the storm. His quiet presence, his unwavering belief in me, kept that ember alive. "You're not alone," he reminded me one evening as I sat staring blankly at the wall. His voice was calm but firm, like a lifeline thrown across a chasm. I wanted to believe him, but the weight of the family's rejection felt like quicksand, pulling me deeper. Still, that tiny spark of hope, so fragile and faint, refused to be extinguished. I knew deep down that something had to change. I just didn't know what yet. The day I came home to an empty room was the day everything shattered. I carried my usual calm facade, but inside, dread twisted my stomach into knots. The front door was ajar when I arrived, a silent warning I didn't heed until I stepped inside. My bedroom was stripped bare, my clothes folded neatly on the floor, my books gone, my laptop missing from the desk where it always sat. The space felt hollow, echoing the void growing inside me. I froze, staring at the barren walls, the absence screaming louder than any shout. Mom and Dad stood silently in the hallway, their faces blank, devoid of the warmth they once showed. Stuart lingered nearby, a smug smirk playing on his lips, as if this was some cruel joke he alone understood. Then the knock came, sharp, insistent. I opened the door to find a lawyer standing there, briefcase in hand. The papers he dropped on the doorstep felt like a death sentence, The documents claimed the house, my home, the place I'd poured my heart into, was being transferred away from me. The rationale was chillingly clinical, a family consensus that I was unfit to retain ownership. The words burned into my mind. The house I had paid for, the shelter I'd made safe for years, was being ripped from me by the very people I loved. My throat tightened, but not with tears. It was a cold clarity that settled over me like ice, numbing yet sharp. The veil lifted, and I saw the truth laid bare. The family had chosen the betrayer. Hope died that morning, but out of that death something new was born. A steel forged from betrayal, a fire stoked by injustice. I stood there, stunned yet strangely hollow, feeling the weight of their rejection like a physical blow. The home that once stood as a symbol of family had become the battleground of my undoing. And as I looked at Stuart's triumphant grin, the cold clarity inside me whispered one undeniable fact. I was on my own now. The fragile illusions of love and family had shattered, and beneath the shards, something darker and stronger was taking shape. Sitting alone in that quiet cafe hours later, the world outside buzzed past, indifferent to the storm raging inside me. I replayed the years of sacrifice in my mind, the sleepless nights managing bills, the silent struggles, the emotional labor I'd carried like an invisible burden, and then the betrayals, the whispered doubts, the sideways glances, the family turning their backs as if I were the intruder. The pain was raw, but beneath it, a fierce anger began to rise, coiling like a serpent ready to strike. This wasn't the first time I'd been pushed away, but this time, it felt irrevocable. The pattern was clear, as was the script I refused to follow any longer. Anger sharpened my focus like a blade. I understood now that my silence, my loyalty, had been weaponized against me. But the realization that held the most power was this. I held the legal keys to the house. The very thing they tried to strip from me was mine by law, dormant, but unbreakable. This truth was my secret weapon, my quiet rebellion. No longer would I be the silent victim, swallowed by their narratives. Never again, I whispered to the empty room, tasting the bitter strength of resolve on my tongue. Grief gave way to fury, and fury morphed into a cold, calculated clarity. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. That evening, I sat with Daniel, the weight of the day pressing down on us both. The air between us was thick with unspoken fears and simmering determination. I laid out my thoughts carefully, each word deliberate. "It's time to turn the tables," I said, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I explained how I planned to challenge the transfer legally, to use the ownership papers as a shield and a sword. But I knew that wasn't enough. Stuart's manipulations ran deep. We needed to expose his debts, his lies, the facade he'd built to dismantle my life piece by piece. Daniel nodded, cautious but resolute. "You're not alone," he said softly, placing his hand over mine. His support was a balm, grounding me in the chaos. As we mapped out the first steps, a strategic calm settled over me. The fear and confusion were still there, but beneath them was a warrior's focus. I was no longer the fragile daughter, the overlooked sister. I was a force to be reckoned with. Stuart was the target, and I was ready to dismantle the house of cards he'd built. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the steady beat of hope pulse through my veins. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by stacks of bank statements, utility bills, and insurance documents, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cluttered surface. Each paper was a thread in the complicated web tying me to this family. Mortgage payments I'd managed for years, insurance premiums I'd kept current, countless utility bills I'd quietly ensured never went unpaid. It was exhausting to catalog it all, but necessary. The more I mapped out every financial dependency, the clearer it became. I was the linchpin holding everything together, even as Stuart's shadow lurked beneath it all. Then there were Stuart's debts, hidden, volatile, and growing. Over $50,000 in unpaid loans he never mentioned, but that I discovered while sifting through shared accounts and old emails. The weight of this secret felt like a stone in my chest. How had he kept this from everyone? Worse, How many times had our family's stability teetered on the edge because of his reckless choices? I felt a mix of anger and disbelief twisting inside me, but beneath that was a steely resolve. I had to use this knowledge. It was no longer just about protecting myself. It was about exposing the damage he'd done. I arranged a meeting with a family lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She laid out the legal landscape clearly. I had undeniable ownership rights to the house, and there were mechanisms to block any attempt Stuart might make to transfer the property without my consent. With her guidance, I started gathering evidence. Bank statements showing my consistent payments, text messages where Stuart's manipulations were undeniable, financial records highlighting the disparity between what I'd contributed and what Stuart had hidden. The truth was there, naked and damning. But it wasn't just the paperwork. I mapped the emotional terrain too, considering who might be swayed in this battle. Lisa's recent doubts about Stuart's sincerity, her subtle withdrawal from family conversations, hinted at a crack in the fortress of his influence. Evelyn's quiet frustration, glimpsed in a fleeting glare or a tight smile, suggested she too was no longer fully aligned with Stuart. I realized with a surge of unexpected clarity that the family needed me more than I needed them. For so long, I'd felt powerless and isolated, but now the balance of power was shifting, and I was ready to tilt the scales. This realization was both liberating and terrifying. I wasn't just fighting to hold on to the house. I was preparing to redefine my place in this fractured family. The groundwork was laid, the pieces charted like a chessboard. I could almost taste the possibility of change, bitter and sharp like the cold air outside the window. And yet, beneath the surface of this calculated calm, my heart pounded fiercely, aware that the storm was gathering strength, and soon, everything would be set into motion. In the quiet that followed, I became a ghost in my own home, moving carefully through routines that felt both familiar and fragile. I changed passwords on every shared account, banking, utilities, family email, locking down access with codes only I knew. Each update was a quiet assertion of control, a shield protecting what was mine. I arranged for an audit of the family finances, commissioning a professional to uncover any further irregularities I might have missed. The lawyer updated legal documents, reinforcing my ownership and preparing for any contest Stuart might attempt. My world became one of silent preparation, every action deliberate but unseen. At family dinners, I wore my mask of normalcy. I smiled and nodded along to conversations, laughed at jokes, and kept the edge of my thoughts carefully guarded. It was exhausting to play this role, calm on the surface while every nerve beneath was taut with tension. Daniel noticed the shift. His eyes caught mine with a mixture of quiet approval and concern, recognizing the guarded confidence replacing the hesitation he'd seen before. It was a small comfort, his unspoken support anchoring me amid the growing chaos. Around me, the family carried on unaware, or pretending to. Their chatter about mundane things, the clatter of dishes, the scent of home-cooked meals, it all felt like the calm before a storm no one saw coming. Inside me, a coil tightened, ready to spring. The deception, the betrayals, the silent battles, they all led to this moment of poised stillness. I reminded myself to breathe, to keep my face serene. No one could know how close the breaking point was. This was my quiet before the reckoning, a final pause before the storm would break and reshape everything. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and the house was draped in fading gold, Lisa slipped into the kitchen holding a manila envelope. Her voice was barely above a whisper, urgent and hesitant. "You need to see this," she said, sliding the envelope across the counter toward me. My fingers trembled as I opened it, heart hammering as I unfolded the papers inside. There, clear as daylight, were email threads between Stuart and a distant cousin. The messages detailed forged signatures, clandestine transactions, siphoning off $30,000 from the family trust, money that had been set aside for Mom's medical bills. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. How deep had Stuart's lies run? How many more secrets had I been blind to? Lisa's eyes searched mine, filled with a mix of guilt and resolve. "I've suspected for a while, but I was scared," she admitted softly. I didn't want to tear the family apart, but now, I'm with you. I want to help. Her words were a lifeline, unexpected and precious. I felt the weight of isolation begin to lift, replaced by a flicker of hope that maybe I wasn't alone in this fight after all. The evidence was undeniable, a damning blow that shifted everything. Stuart's house of cards was starting to crumble, and I held the key. The family's foundation, already fragile, now teetered perilously. This new discovery was a catalyst, adding urgency and legitimacy to my battle. No longer was this just about reclaiming my place. It was about exposing a deeper rot that threatened to poison us all. The shock of betrayal mingled with a fierce clarity. The fight ahead was no longer just personal. It was a battle for truth and justice within the family I once thought I knew. With renewed determination, I reached out to my lawyer that very night. The words felt heavy as I instructed her to file injunctions blocking any attempts by Stuart to transfer the property. I knew the legal system could be slow, but this step was crucial, a line drawn in the sand. At the same time, I took my first practical step towards cutting ties. I stopped making the mortgage payments. It was a calculated risk, knowing the family would notice the missed payments, that the utilities might falter, bills might go unpaid. It would rattle the household, spark whispers and suspicion, but I wasn't ready to reveal my full hand just yet. As the days passed, small glitches began to ripple through the household. Lights flickered when bills went unsettled. A silence filled the kitchen where the gas had been cut off temporarily. Family members exchanged worried glances, murmurs filling the spaces between them. I watched it all with a calm mask, feeling the pulse of power shift slowly but surely. Stuart sensed it too. When he confronted me, his tone was cold, his eyes sharp with challenge. "What are you playing at, Madison?" he demanded. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a crack in my armor. "I'm just prioritizing," I said quietly, folding my arms in front of me. "Keeping the house afloat requires care. It's not about control." My voice was calm, but beneath it lay a quiet threat. I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, a crack in his confident facade. Daniel stood by my side during the confrontation, his presence a silent bolster. His steady gaze met mine, offering strength without words. He saw the woman I was becoming, no longer the victim, but a strategist poised to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The chessboard was set, and the first moves had been made. My actions were deliberate, precise, and quietly devastating. Stuart's confidence wavered, the foundation he'd built on lies and manipulation beginning to shift underfoot. The family whispered, unsettled and uncertain, sensing a change but unable to grasp its full shape. I remained composed, watching, waiting for the moment when the next move would break the silence and expose the truth hidden beneath years of deceit. The game was far from over, but the battle lines were drawn, and the storm was gathering strength. The day of the family meeting arrived with the weight of a storm pressing down on my chest. As I stood in the living room, the murmur of footsteps and voices drifting from the kitchen grew louder, until Lisa, Daniel, and Evelyn gathered around the table, their faces a mixture of suspicion, fatigue, and guarded curiosity. Stuart was there too, wearing the same smug, knowing smile that always made my skin crawl. But this time I wasn't trembling inside. I had spent nights preparing, layering my defense with cold, irrefutable facts. I could feel the truth coiling beneath my calm exterior, ready to strike. I took a deep breath and began, voice steady, even, as I laid out the evidence one piece at a time. Emails between Stuart and his cousin, meticulously documented. Forged signatures on documents he'd thought hidden. The financial audit, crisp and damning, showing debts and transfers none of us knew about. I watched Stuart's face blanch as the weight of exposure settled on him like a shroud. "I hold the deed to this house," I said clearly, the words slicing through the tense silence. The room shifted. Lisa's eyes locked on mine, firm with understanding. Evelyn's mouth opened, a protest forming, but she faltered, silenced by the truth hanging heavy in the air. "Stuart," I continued, voice firm but without venom, "your debts are extensive, your manipulations relentless. I have already taken legal steps to protect what belongs to this family. and most importantly, what belongs to me. My heart pounded beneath my ribs, but my hands were steady as I laid out the boundaries. No more lies, no more betrayal, no more illusions of control. The murmurs grew louder, a chorus of disbelief and shock, but also relief. The mask Stuart had worn so carefully slipped away, revealing the desperation beneath. The power had shifted, and for the first time in years, I felt the room align with me. Lisa's nod was slow but unmistakable, her quiet support a balm to my battered spirit. Daniel's hand found mine across the table, a lifeline in this storm of revelations. The tension thickened, but I held my ground, voice steady and eyes unwavering. I wasn't just unveiling evidence, I was reclaiming my dignity, asserting my place in a family that had too often ignored me. And as I spoke those final words, setting the terms of a new beginning, I realized the truth was no longer a secret. It was a force that could no longer be denied. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and merciless. Stuart's carefully constructed world began to unravel like a fragile web in a storm. Phone calls from lenders became relentless, their voices sharp with urgency and disbelief. Family members who once nodded along with his stories now cornered him privately, their faces etched with confusion and hurt. He reached out to me too, frantic texts, pleading voicemails begging for forgiveness, promises to change. But I was no longer the girl who had kept silent through his betrayals. When he stood on my doorstep, tears streaking his face, hands shaking as he tried to explain, I looked at him with a fierce calm. "No, Stuart," I said quietly, the finality in my voice breaking something in him. "This isn't about forgiveness anymore. I didn't invite him in, didn't give him the comfort his desperation sought. Instead, I closed the door with a quiet resolve that echoed louder than any argument." Other family members began to shift too. Lisa publicly distanced herself, her own voice soft but clear in conversations where Stuart's name once held unquestioned loyalty. The family dynamic trembled palpably. Stuart's influence crumbled beneath the weight of truth and consequence. Through it all, I maintained my boundaries like a fortress. I refused to engage his attempts at manipulation or guilt. Instead, I let the evidence speak, watched the ripple of his isolation grow. The once smooth-talking, charming figure was now a man cornered by his own deceit. And while the family fractured, splintering under the strain, I stood firm, quiet, resolute, unyielding. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The consequence of truth was brutal, immediate, and utterly transformative. In the weeks that followed, Stuart's desperation escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Threats of lawsuits for defamation arrived in the mail, cold and legal in their implication. He launched emotional attacks too, blaming me for tearing the family apart, painting himself as the victim of a cruel conspiracy. His remaining supporters, few and hesitant, started to echo his barbs, launching rumors and whispers meant to unsettle me. But I was prepared. Every communication was documented, every word logged and shared with my lawyer. The legal shield I'd built was no longer just theoretical. It was a living defense against his ploys. Some family members, shaken by the chaos, approached me privately, their voices trembling with remorse. They admitted their doubts, their failures to see the manipulation sooner, their regret for siding with Stuart unknowingly. Each apology was a small balm, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, clarity could emerge. Stuart's confident facade cracked visibly, his eyes no longer gleaming with certainty, but shadowed with defeat. The man who had once wielded control was now a shadow, isolated and beaten not by force, but by the relentless power of truth and strategy. I held my ground through the chaos, refusing to be drawn into his games. His threats dissolved under the weight of legal preparation. His accusations bounced off the armor of my resolve. And as his influence waned, the family began to stabilize, cautiously realigning with honesty and accountability. The battle had been hard and painful, but in the end, it was the quiet strength of truth that prevailed. Stuart was defeated, not with anger or shouting, but with the cold, steady light of facts and unshakable will. 6 months later, the air in the house feels lighter, almost unfamiliar in its peace. The legal battles have settled, The house remains mine, protected not just by papers, but by a boundary I've drawn firmly around my life and my heart. Daniel and I have grown closer, our relationship forged in the fires of shared hardship and quiet victories. Our conversations carry a new depth, a trust built not just on affection, but on the battles we've fought side by side. Family gatherings are smaller now, stripped of pretense but filled with sincerity. Lisa and I are cautiously rebuilding the fragile bridges that betrayal once burned, our exchanges measured but hopeful. The old family dynamic, the one that I once treasured, feels distant, replaced by a new rhythm that respects autonomy and honors truth. Stuart faces the consequences he never wanted to face: financial ruin, estrangement, and the cold silence that follows a fall from grace. I do not harbor bitterness. I carry only the clarity that strength grows quietly from resolve and clarity, not from shouting or spectacle. Looking back, I see the journey for what it was: a harsh, painful education in the cost of silence and the power of standing firm. Now, as I sit in the quiet of my own home, the night settling softly around me, I feel a calm I haven't known in years. The future is open, unwritten, and for once I hold the pen. I don't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Stuart, not to the family, not even to myself. I've earned my place with dignity, not demanded it with anger. And in that, I find a freedom that feels like home. The journey was long and jagged, but I am here, whole, strong, ready for whatever comes next.